Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our July 15th continuation of our budget deliberations. This is the Douglas County Commission, Board of County, and we will probably go through some of the work that we did on Monday, kind of evaluate where we are, and then we have some other tasks of other line items to get to as we're working through our budget. Sarah, did you want to start us off, or Cami?
I can start us off. I think we just need to, I have that the last thing we were going to do was talk about Senior Resource Center and KHD, or do you want to look through the spreadsheet first and get a sense of where you are?
I know there was some discussion. Do we need a recap of what was decided last time, or do you want to just move into, we have conversations about community partners that did not necessarily have a supplemental request?
Yeah, we had, yeah, that too. It's up to the commission.
Commissioner Willie, I think I've heard you mention a couple of times that there are some community partners that don't have supplemental requests that you wanted to discuss further. Maybe that's worthwhile. I'm looking at Commissioner Kelly too to see if he has any input, and maybe you did mention some of them, or we touched on a few throughout, but maybe it's a good opportunity to talk about those.
Okay, and then we'll jump into senior resource and KHD shortly after that. Okay, well, then I had, so one of the things that I had was pulling, so this is for Peaslee Tech, and we have the $200,000 of kind of ongoing funding for them. I don't have any issues with that. We have the $200,000, which is the final year of a balloon payment for their mortgage for their building, and that's the portion that we've been covering. I thought that being, since it is not an ongoing, it is only this year, finishing this year, that we could move that $200,000 to one-time expense. So that left $200,000 as a part of our mill levy, as ongoing support for Peaslee Tech, and then $200,000 as one time. What do commissioners think about that?
I think that sounds, I think that sounds good, but I wanted to check in with Sarah. You know, we talked a little bit last time about fund balance and where we are with fund balance. And since my understanding of that $200,000 is this is the last year of it. We won't need the mill levy going forward.
That's our understanding. I mean, I'm comfortable with 200,000, but I want to keep track and see where we end up.
Yeah, that's.
I generally agree. I mean, I think it's not a bad use of it. I don't remember how much mill levy impact that has, but again, cumulatively after today and possibly tomorrow's discussions, I'm good with putting that in the one-time pot for now.
Okay. And it's about 0.1 mil, but.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and that was the discussion we had last year too, was that additional 200,000 towards the building was coming to an end, and this is the last year we'd see it. So I'm happy to see that building gets paid off. I had a couple of others flagged, and this is mostly, as much as anything, it's kind of placeholders for some of the discussion I think I heard us having with community partners and wanted to circle back on it. We have a tremendous number of nonprofits in our community. We fund some, we don't fund others, and that's not really based on how much they align with our work, as some of it's just kind of the history that we've had with them. So I dug into, I heard others also digging into community partners that had significantly higher fund balances than we would ever keep at the county, and recognizing that 3 to 6 month fund balance for an organization is pretty healthy. Beyond a year or so seems excessive if they're still going to come and ask for county dollars too. And so the two that I had flagged for that were CASA, who is very nicely funded through their other funding streams, and visiting nurses. So commissioners, did you have any others that you kind of thought fell into that role?
I don't think I had. Yeah, but that was for a different reason than what Commissioner Willie just said. Yeah, I think it would be good for us if we're thinking that organizations who have extreme high fund balances are ones that we need to think about reducing funding or eliminating funding. Last year, to my knowledge, was the first year we did that, and we did it at a percentage of theirs to, sort of send that message. I think, were these the only two that had that level of fund balance, Commissioner Willie?
That were of any significant amount, but
Okay.
I believe so, but I'd have to double check. The other one that we asked for more information on actually was Peasley, and I think they were showing, there were a couple of that I think were showing some of their property value as opposed to actually unrestricted fund balance, so it's less liquid. But these are the two that seemed like these were actually, liquid assets in fund balance that were available for programs. The other one was Just Foods that wasn't, I think, quite at this level, but it was talking about coming to us for increased food costs when they hadn't really done much to use fund balance to address those issues. So, and I think the only thing I did in reaction to that, though, was not recommend the supplemental.
Yeah, I had, the only other one I added, I flagged VNA and CASA certainly. This is well over, almost 150% and then over 200% fund balance percentage to budget. I had flagged Artists Helping the Homeless, but as you just alluded to, Commissioner Willie, we talked about how they were including the properties in that. And so I don't think that's quite an accurate representation. And then Senior Resource Center is pretty up there, but again, we're going to have a larger conversation about them, and I think their situation is that they're more, their situation is a little bit unique, I think, in terms of their operating and fund balance, but those are the two that I flagged. I will acknowledge that I, based on the question asked and answered of CASA, was comfortable eliminating their funding. It does not feel that it was a compelling need for funds from us. But I did not make any cuts in VNA because it was a little bit of a different answer from them, and their fund balance has been being utilized and going down year after year, it looks like, based on the budget history we had. So those are some of the thoughts I had looking at theirs sheets again.
Yeah, I also put in a cut to CASA, but I didn't cut it completely. And my rationale behind that is we had some partners last year, Just Food and VNA, who were in that boat, and we flagged it. We said we don't think that that it's best practice to have such high fund balances and then be asking our voters for more money. And so my suggestion was to cut them by a third, which is 20,000. I didn't include VNA in that cut, primarily based on the feedback they gave when they visited with us about, their fund balance continuing to go down. I think that I had some conversations with VNA last year after the budget hearings, a little bit understanding, sharing both sides of that. They have a high need, and I felt like we needed to be sensitive to the impact on taxpayers when organizations have large fund balances. So I felt like we sort of set a precedent then, and I didn't want to just wipe out a community partner's entire funding. But if that's where both of the commissioners want to go, we certainly can have that discussion.
Well, I did have an elimination of funding for CASA, and it's 60,000 of a large budget. It's not, I don't think in any way that it would damage them for the other funding streams that they have. My thought was they're going to keep coming back so long as we fund them at all. And because then we're basically saying the expectation is that we expect you to come back, and they'll be in the same boat next year, presumably, with the fund balance issue. So I did recommend cutting CASA. Certainly would welcome them to come back if their situation becomes significantly different. Visiting nurses, I did have a reduction there. I had a $60,000 reduction, which was kind of to flag an opportunity for us to have the conversation. I can't stress enough how important it is that organizations give us accurate financials. Over and over again, we got something that doesn't make sense, and we'd ask questions about it, and they say, "Well, that's not what we meant." They need to really. We expect a high level of accountability and transparency for our organizations. That's not necessarily that we're talking about CASA and BNA for that, but certainly our partners overall have not been. Have sometimes been a little sloppy with what they're willing to give us. And it's all open and available for the public. I would think for their own reputation, they would want to really pay attention to the financial information that they're putting out there. So that was more of a rant than anything. I'm comfortable keeping visiting nurses at the same allocation as previously, since other commissioners are too, and recognizing that they are using that fund balance. So I can withdraw that if you want.
I think too, we should have a conversation. Just a question I have is there an expectation that the commission has for fund balance for these organizations? And what happens when, as Commissioner Willie says, that, some of these are sloppy, or, I'm sure staff communicated not to include capital assets in their fund balance, but they include them anyways. We have a really pretty tight timeline here to make decisions. And what I don't want is, and I'm not saying they would do this intentionally, for organizations to misreport their fund account, because we're not asking them for an audited fund. These are self-reported numbers, right?
You also ask for audits, and
But in the
that's,
service agreement, correct? Not at this point, not during the budget request. Am I wrong on that, Sarah?
Yeah, they do it as part of their service agreements.
As part of their service agreement. So after the funding request has been made.
Yeah, or before next year's.
Right. So I just think we as a what I want to do is not isolate a specific partner in having this conversation, but maybe have something more policy driven that says, if you're putting in a budget request, here is this, and in the service agreement, your audited numbers need to be accurately aligned to what you submitted during your budget request. Is that crazy, Sarah?
It's not crazy. The hard part is that oftentimes when partners are signing community partner agreements, like, they're still working off unaudited in 990s, and then we get busy, and then and we come back in the fall, and where's your updated financials? And, so if you don't want anything to go forward unless I have last year's financials and everything matches, we got a lot of folks on this list that aren't gonna make that cut.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm headed here, is that I think we need to have a longer conversation, maybe away from this budget request, about what our expectations are for fund balance and for financial reporting. What we're getting today is way improved from where we were 6 years ago when I started. So, thanks to Sarah and her staff, and especially thanks to our partners for that, because that was something we've requested. But I want to be really thoughtful about how we make decisions based on the information that we're given directly from partners. We got a number of emails over the weekend about something that was there, and then it's not there, then it's back there, a funding amount from another entity, and that makes me a little nervous.
so we have the self-reported financials that come at budget time, and then we have the follow-up financials that go to staff. There was also a lot of struggles in getting community partners to submit those, I believe. And so I think we finally are pretty caught up. But I was getting a little antsy about being expected to fund partners that don't expect to provide financial information back to the taxpayers that are providing that. So I recognize timing-wise that getting audited financials is a real struggle for nonprofits because of we just don't have enough accountants in that work. It's always really slow. But even those unaudited financials, knowing that the audit is coming, are a huge help to match back and say, is that realistically aligned with what you told us during budget time? So just drawing us back to the conversation at hand, we have first CASA and visiting nurses. It sounds like visiting nurses will remain at the 260,000. Is that what I'm hearing from commissioners?
Yeah, I think I don't support another reduction to VNA at this time. As far as CASA goes, Commissioner Kelly, I appreciate your approach to a bit of a gradual decrease, and so I'm open to that. I think I will say what stood out to me about this particular one, and is the answer that we got the other day was pretty explicit during our budget hearing that they didn't need the funds. However, I can recognize that maybe that was a question that wasn't expected, and a sort of a level of investigation, or for lack of a better phrase, sort of really digging into the details of their fund balance that wasn't expected. So, I'd be supportive of not a full cut, but some cut if Commissioner Willie is interested in that. And agree with you, Commissioner Kelly, that I do think based on a couple of sort of isolated conversations in the past couple of budget cycles, that we do need to have a bigger conversation about how we figure out what the right balance is in terms of laying out some expectations and still being flexible and nimble enough to understand, with the awareness of those timelines, audited and non-audited, and that almost all of our community partners are functioning on a variety of different fiscal years versus calendar years too, and that's another sort of complicating factor. So I think appreciate Commissioner Kelly's longer term perspective that progress has really been made in terms of the quality of documentation and the clarity about each community partner's financials. And Commissioner, really appreciate your perspective and desire to increase that and increase your confidence and the confidence of the public that we are operating in our decision making based on quality and clear information that is as consistent as it can be amongst a bunch of different partners with a bunch of different funding situations. I wonder if, I noticed that we took 20,000 off of VNA last year. And Commissioner Kelly, you said that 20,000 was what you had recommended for.
It is,
CASA.
and I want to come into this space ready to change my mind, listening to my colleagues, because I do think if they did say during the hearing that they don't need the funding, we have voters out there who need those dollars, or community members who are living on fixed incomes, and it's our job to maintain a mill levy for only those dollars that are needed to conduct those services. So I could be convinced to go to 60. But I think, we just need to think about that precedent that we're setting of they made the offer here on the spot, we asked the question, and then we're pulling all of their funding. So that isn't the way we've practiced in the past.
Yeah, and I just would be really cautious about everyone's going to come back now and tell you they need the money. So I don't think that's the only reason why you should make the decision. I think you should. I think they have sufficient fund balance, and I think it's clear that they have ongoing revenue sources, but they're always going to ask you for money.
When I'm evaluating the financials from the partners, one of the things I'm looking for is that what they have for a fund balance for their own stability. Anything less than 3 months, I feel like they that's actually tricky for them. It's not necessarily our problem to solve for them, but I'm looking at that in terms of their long-term stability. Anything over about 6 months, I feel like that's getting especially comfortable for a nonprofit. Nonprofits do well when they're kind of lean. But anything approaching a year, I've flagged everything that was over 6 months. And that's not to rule those out. It's just that I'm looking in their narrative for an explanation of that. Like if they have, 12 months worth of, or 24 months worth of fund balance there, then my question is, are you saving up for a big project? What else is coming? And not finding those things in the narrative is what makes me, flag potentially for a cut. So I'm certainly fine with leaving visiting nurses as it is. For the CASA, we've had conversation around a full cut of 60,000, a cut of 20,000. We could also find a middle way and cut 40,000 that leaves them in the conversation with us to come back if they choose to.
Yeah, I'd be fine with a $40,000 cut.
Me too.
Commissioner Kelly, you had flagged Vinland Fair for a conversation.
Yes, and I want to be clear, this is not because I don't think we shouldn't fund the Vinland Fair. It's a great event. It is, to my check, the smallest budget request that we have. Would that be correct? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the smallest
Santa Fe
one.
Trail is like $3,750.
Yeah, well, I think that was their, yeah. And this is where I think we created a new, or there's the proposal in the budget to create a new fund within the HCC grants for cultural events. And my recommendation is to move this to that. I'd be interested to hear from commissioners about whether, this is that grant submitted and we're going to use those dollars this year. If we want to move these dollars to that grant, I have there's lots of ways we can do this, but that seems like the appropriate place for this event to go and this event to be funded out of rather than an annual request. Because this is a one-time event that happens in the community, which seems more aligned to that HCC grant process.
Ongoing each year.
I know it's ongoing, yes. We also have had different events that come back every year and request those dollars outside of budget cycle. So I'd like to get that condensed.
I appreciate those thoughts, Commissioner Kelly. I guess, Sarah, in terms of like sort of community partners delegated to staff for communication and service agreements and financials and whatnot, is HCC staff who is communicating with Vinland Fair already? I mean, I guess who is Vinland Fair assigned to in that?
I mean, right now
sphere?
it's admin staff because it's been viewed as a community partner. Caitlin Ammerline is on, and I moved her into the panel. If Caitlin would want to talk more about that fund and what it's being used for.
Sure.
Hi there. You guys can hear me?
Yep. Thanks,
Perfect.
Caitlin.
Yeah. So basically that fund is kind of sort of where we envisioned sort of collecting these sort of scattered events that have been funded in multiple ways throughout the county for several years now. And so basically the details are still to be worked out, and we could come to in the fall with sort of the process for that. But we really envision it being a way to annually support events outside of the competitive grant process. So it would be not as intensive as a full grant application, so we would know what to expect each year, but still with those appropriate check-ins to ensure financial accountability and make sure. But basically it's envisioned as a way to collect all those pieces in one shared pool and supporting lived cultural heritage in a way that is in alignment with HCC's sort of new direction.
And Caitlin, you have existing funds in the HCC budget to support this work?
Yeah, so basically we proposed beginning the fund with existing HCC grant dollars. So our budget originally had $43,000 for professional services. And so we have proposed this year splitting off $20,000 of that since we do less contractual work in our department now to help seed this fund. And of course, funds could be added to it over time or sorted from other pools into this fund. So it's really kind of to start it and kind of see what the need is.
I think that would work fine, and if for some reason you all change your mind, it's, $4,000, and we can talk about it later.
Which is the easier process for them to apply to, the
We don't.
HCC or through here?
Well, that process is a little bit yet to be determined, so I don't know the answer to that question.
I'm just not wanting to add any burdens to this small volunteer board of
I don't think
applying
it-
for funding.
I bet it would probably be easier to go through her process than it would be to go through the county process.
That's my thought, but I just wanted to
It's
ask
just
the question.
not without knowing the full details, but we could have Caitlin bring that back to you guys this fall and talk through it and how we're going to promote that and publicize it. And we can certainly do a warm handoff from the Vinland Fair to Caitlin and make sure that that group has all the information.
Yeah, I'm fine moving Finland Fair to that fund. Caitlin, can you tell us what other kind of community events currently are anticipated to apply through that?
Yeah, so the main event that we sort of had in mind was the Day of the Dead celebration put on by West Lawrence. They've come through the HCC grant program the past 3 years now. They've done extremely excellent work. And so it really brought the idea of how can we support these events outside of the rigorous grant application process every year. And so that was really the sort of start of this idea. Another thing that was flagged by county administration as well was the Juneteenth celebration. They came to you all as commissioners several years in a row. And so kind of collecting a common pool for these to live in. But those were kind of the three main sort of areas we kind of envisioned for this fund, and could definitely, use it and then see where it goes from there.
Yep, I'm fine with that.
Good idea, Commissioner Kelly. Thanks.
Have any other community partners that we wanted to talk through? So we reduced CASA by 40,000 and we did not reduce VNA. And then we moved the Vinland Fair we took it off the mill levy and it will be redirected to the HCC process. And Peasley Tech will do $200,000 one time, but their remaining funding of $200,000 will stay on the general fund.
That's all I had.
Want to talk about SRC and KHD now, or do you want to go?
Just real quick before we move on, I'm seeing on Commissioner Kelly's suggested budget a one-time fund for Artists Helping the Homeless. Did we talk through that? It's not carried over into our commissioner budget. Line 138. It's in mental health sales tax, so maybe it's.
I would like to talk about all of the behavioral health sales tax separately
Okay.
when we get there. And
Got it.
I think that was part of his COLA conversation, but I'd like us to review all of the behavioral health sales tax in a minute or whenever we're ready.
I would agree with that.
Do we have any other community partners that we need to discuss?
No community partners. I had one internal department question that my notes just didn't give me a clear, I didn't have a clear memory of it. Commissioner Kelly, I think it was you who clarified the one-time cost for the fire protocol software and then the ongoing. I had those numbers written down, but I couldn't fully remember what we talked about. And I was trying to make a list of the sort of possible one-time buckets or opportunities that we wouldn't use mill levy for. And I wasn't sure if that was one we were thinking based on our conversation.
It is an area we still had questions on. So we have it in the spreadsheet as what? The full amount. Is coming out of mill levy
And where would we find that?
Currently, the full amount is coming out of the 2025 budget mill levy.
So we did not reduce it yet, but we can if that's where the commission is at.
Okay,
We
and
were-
I may be
staff was
jumping the
unclear.
gun. It was just one question I had, I couldn't figure out the answer to from my
Yeah, there's a
reviewing my own notes.
$132,000 difference between the ongoing and the amount that is currently in the budget.
Wait, you said it differently that time.
I didn't mean to.
Okay. So
Okay,
is the whole one
the whole 160 is in there
as ongoing or as,
As ongoing.
as ongoing.
Okay.
And so we need to make an update to that. The ongoing amount is $132,000 lower. It is
Okay.
$28,000.
so yeah, can you make a note on the spreadsheet?
Yeah.
So,
Let's just go ahead and do that math and subtract out the 132.
so 28,000 is the ongoing amount to the mill levy,
Correct.
and 132,000 is the one-time cost for the software.
And that joins the 200,000 from Peasley on one-time funds coming from the general fund.
Yes.
Yes. I thought we had also, we've now moved into county department, so we'd also talked about specialty courts evaluation being one time. So that's the third one I'd add. Okay,
I can add it. We can bring back to you a whole list of one-time general
Remember to
fund.
stay on your mic.
yeah.
We can bring it back to you, a list that's all one-time general fund expenses that have been added.
Okay.
Thanks, commissioners and staff. Sorry, it was just my one unclear one of all the one-time
Well,
things, but maybe staff has more, so I might have
If-
just jumped the gun on.
We have one more on the sheriff. So I guess, do we? So what do you have in for the mill levy on the sheriff's
Two
position?
positions on the mill levy.
Is that where you ended up, that 2 positions on the mill levy?
That's what I remember, commissioners.
Yeah, I think
was
I
not
was
in the
hoping
spreadsheet
to
over the
just
weekend.
fund the one out of mill levy and have the other 2 be on the sheriff to find within their budget, but I think the consensus or the majority was with the 2 positions.
So this is 2, so I had built 1 in,
Yes.
and then
And
the
it's one
second one
more.
is the additional one, so it's not 3.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, it's 2, got it.
But I think the idea was that the sheriff certainly has the ability or the authority to reallocate funds within his budget if he wanted to
Sure.
find funds for that 3rd position.
Yeah,
And-
we can talk through that with him. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, that was, our other question was trying to make sure that wasn't a 3rd position in there.
Got it. All right, are we ready to talk about senior resources?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I'm going to turn it to Commissioner Kelly, but for starters, I had put a little something in that line item that was really just to flag the conversation that if we were looking at a change, if they and we were looking at a conversation about a change in the organization, a placeholder for some dollars, it was not intended that those dollars be turned over to them in addition to their request. So probably the commissioner's budget line item is where that 220,000 could rightfully have been, but sounds like we have another discussion. So Commissioner Kelly, do you want to start that?
Yeah, so just in case folks weren't listening last week, one of the things is that the Senior Resource Center is one of those organizations that we fund over 50% of their operating expenditures or of their total expenditures. We read in the narrative that over the past few years, the Senior Resource Center is spending down its fund balances at what I would say is a pretty significant rate. And then the request this year, and I think in last year as well, was a request for COLA increases. And I feel like it's time to start having a conversation. We don't really have a department for senior care. That's not something we have worked with community partners in that space. I do think there is, while staff does a great job sort of working with all of our senior care partners, I think there is the potential for better collaboration among them. We've seen that happen naturally in the historic resources area with Caitlin's help, but this is a place where I'm starting to wonder whether the Senior Resource Center should become a county department. I recognize that that loses independence for that organization, but some of the things that I heard their executive director, Megan Poindexter, talk about was, funding seems to be really drying up. I'm just really concerned about, I think having these services is really important. And I want to make sure that they continue to exist. And if we're funding 50% of it and they're asking for COLA increases, when are they behaving like a county department already? And so I had put money, not just what they requested, but also some other dollars in the commissioner budget to sort of to have this conversation, to hold on to that money and see what we need. They have a pretty healthy fund balance, which could help with a transition over time. We wouldn't, set aside a particular fund balance for just that organization. We would include it with the entire county's fund balance. So those are just sort of my thinkings, and I recognize that this disrupts the way we do business in Douglas County, but I think it feels to me like we're headed towards a place where it could become an emergency in saving the Senior Resource Center if we don't start to think ahead now.
So I kind of wrap this into some of the conversations that we have had and some that are much needed to be had around senior services, especially around housing, that was one of the largest groups that was flagged by our supportive housing needs study. And that's one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and a place where I would like to see the county helping to collaborate some conversations and be a leader in that space for our seniors. Also, my family has relied on services from the Senior Resource Center for things that we just could not have provided on our own, especially transportation of some of our elders that we really couldn't manage alone. So these are critical services. I don't know how, I wouldn't necessarily say that the situation there is dire. I just think it is coming to a conversation. I don't think this is a discussion that we can certainly have without them. They are an independent nonprofit, or nearly independent nonprofit, since we give them over 50% of their funds. But I'm interested to have the conversation. I was a little bit kind of reluctant to get there, but I do think that somehow we need to have a space in that conversation in order to make sure that we're moving our services forward for what our seniors need now and will need in the future. There will be more of them. I did flag, I set aside some dollars to look at a possible transition. I think maybe that's too soon, and I think maybe that's not needed. I think the conversation can be had and maybe should be had without kind of an expectation of an outcome, that we all go into it kind of open-minded. So I don't know that it needs to have anything flagged from mill levy at this point, but other commissioners, what are your thoughts?
Commissioner Millie, just to clarify that last thing you said, do you mean additional money flagged for mill levy, or are you saying you don't think that we should set aside their funding to be able to have this conversation?
I had penciled in some additional funding to fund a transition. So we're more than 50% of their funds, but we're certainly not all of them. Many of those funding sources would still come with them under the county umbrella if that were the direction to go. So I think the math that I was doing is not necessary, basically what I was saying.
I follow, but
not
both
to
you
take
and
anything
Commissioner
away.
Kelly did take that into consideration and try and build in what you think a possible additional amount for transition would be.
My rationale behind putting some dollars there was, I think I want to make sure as we have conversations with the Senior Resource Center, they know what we are able to support. I want to be clear. I'm not interested in taking over the Senior Resource Center. This would be them saying, we think the best plan is for our employees to become county employees, for our financials to be run through the county's financial. That's what I'm talking about. It's not a takeover. And so I wanted to make sure that we put some dollars aside to say, we heard Megan say, and I think Sarah has said it as well, there may be some extra costs here as we bring their staff members up to our pay levels. And so I wanted to make sure that was in the mill levy, and then we weren't coming on the back end next year if it happens, and we come on the back end next year and we have to add mill levy to bring on the senior resource center. I'd like to have some mill levy dollars there. If we don't need it, if they choose not to use it, then those are dollars that would be available to us in the future.
Yeah, and that was my original thought too. I also think that because we haven't had these conversations yet, I don't feel quite right setting aside mill levy for that. I think that we could just flag that we would find capacity within our fund balance to make that organization whole if that were, under us, if that were the direction. And then it would have to, of course, be built in after that. So I'm not sure how much you had flagged for that. I did a little math on here, but I don't know if you had other things also in that commissioner budget.
Well, I can go back and do the math and we can whittle that away. I think we have to be thinking too about what our goals are around mill levy, especially long-term. I think we all are in a place wanting to reduce mill levy significantly. But we also have to think, we've had years of very high increases in assessed valuation. We will not always have that. I don't believe we've seen it go down the past 2 years. And while I want to be responsive, and I want to balance that against that, I don't think we're going to see these kind of increases in assessed valuation forever. And so that would cause us to raise a mill levy. And I think that's where we really can hit taxpayers in a place I'm not real comfortable with.
Yeah, I appreciate understanding more about what both commissioners are thinking about in terms of adding additional mill and as a set aside or not. Let me rewind and say I'm very interested in the idea of senior services, senior resources being a county department. Of course, I appreciate you, Commissioner Kelly, framing it that it really is about trying to be able to clearly communicate what is possible and what that would look like in terms of the salary and benefits and administrative structure and possible opportunities, being able to present that clearly and let an independent board and nonprofit decide if that feels like a positive growth opportunity for them, or if they're not quite there yet, then we know that, and we move forward with sort of the funding that they've received from us, and we continue to support them for next year at that level and see where the conversation goes. But I'm very interested in it for a lot of reasons that commissioners have mentioned, and that we have an aging population in this community, and that in a variety of other services that we fund and issues that the county is invested in around homelessness and supportive housing, and the gaps that we see being unfilled, that I think that there's some synergy that really could be achieved by functioning under the umbrella of the county administration and being able to meet the needs as those needs grow, which I expect them to. And to Commissioner Kelly's point about not wanting it to get to a crisis point or an emergency point where they're in true dire straits, to use that phrase again, and not in a position to be able to make a choice about what feels like the right next thing for their organization and how to really shore up their services and make sure that they are able to be sustained, but also grow with as the population ages and those needs change over time. So to that end, I think that I am supportive of I think setting aside that funding makes sense because that's how we can facilitate the more in-depth continued conversation with them as a partner outside of this budget process, a commitment to funding them and being able to calculate and determine with staff what that additional mill levy impact might look like to bring them up to the pay standards of the county if they were to move in that direction for the 2025 year. And again, if not, then that money becomes available again for us to release back to the general fund. Staff, do you have any input about the additional mill levy and calculating that in now for awareness of the potential?
I think it might be wise to reserve some funds for this, just so we don't, I don't want if the commission's expectation is that it's not necessarily revenue neutral or expense neutral, then that's setting some money aside is helpful. But I really appreciate the commissioner's willingness to sort of let us explore what makes sense here with the Senior Resource Center board and their staff. And, we may come back to you with something that's with a lot of questions and some, and maybe it's not going to quite end up the way you think it's going to end up. But I think reserving some funds would not be a bad idea.
So Commissioner Kelly alluded, I'm also very interested in seeing how much mill levy we can turn back as part of this budget process without, really hampering the work into the future. And I do think there is room, and I think we're going to get to something. But I think maybe the thing to do would be to, at this phase in the game, would be to pencil in a dollar amount that might be a placeholder for that conversation. And then as we kind of evaluate the budget as a whole, and before we would pass it, we would kind of look at some of those pieces, many of the pieces that we've talked about, and look at them as the whole budget together to see if we're where we need to be with our mill levy reduction, or if there's some other conversations that need to be had. So I would propose, these were very rough numbers, but I had penciled in that 220,000, which I think was just their budget minus what the county currently gives them. That's not accurate because, it's not going to be the entire story, because many of those funding streams will come along with them, but also that doesn't capture, that would maybe use that to offset the fact that their salaries would be considerably different under a county model. Commissioner,
That number one more time.
220,000. But I say that is not a lot of process that went into that. So Commissioner Kelly, if you had given that some other thought, I'd be glad to hear what it was based on.
I'll be honest, I wish I had made better notes on how I got there, but I also thought, so their additional funding request was for 94 and a half. And then I think I looked at the amount of dollars that they had been spending out of their, I think that's how I did it, out of their fund balance. So sort of looking at, thinking that if that's where they're trying to get to, we may need to cover that long term. And I don't know that that was the right way to do it. I was just trying to come up with a number there. And then looking specifically, I think, at the differences between salaries and benefits and health insurance, right in there is where I was trying, because that seems to be the real driver of those costs. Maybe if we took a bit of a break here in a little bit, maybe we can talk about because I do like what you're saying, Commissioner Willie, around maybe we just put a placeholder there for right now and let's see where we end up with mill levy, because I think some of the undercurrent of this conversation is we may have goals around mill levy and reductions that we're trying to get to. Maybe that is what needs to drive how much we want to put aside for the conversation about Senior Resource Center down the line. So I feel okay, like we're at a place probably where we agree not on the number, but on the idea. And then let's back into that number when we're getting down to really what our mill levy goals are.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And a little struggling into the conversation because I have not had conversations with the Senior Resource Center staff or board at all. And so I'm finding this a little bit delicate. I think you have had some conversations, so you have more confidence there. But yeah, I think we will come up with a placeholder and yes, evaluate that. It's part of the bigger picture as we look at mill levy reduction.
So if that's okay, maybe we move into Kansas Holistic Defenders. So I have a couple of questions about Kansas Holistic Defenders, and just some things that I'm not comfortable. I noticed both commissioners did not fund their salary increases. But one of the things that strikes me about Kansas Holistic Defenders is the percentage of their budget that we fund. I believe it's in the 70%. Is that right? If you give me a second, I can look it up. Nope, I was incorrect. It's 46% right now of their total budget. And that is below, but last year I think it was 58%. So it's gone down a little bit. As we talked about in our discussions with Kansas Holistic Defenders, what they're asking for salary increases is not in line with what we're doing not what you're doing, but what we think needs to be done for the employees of Douglas County. So I'm not interested in what they have there, but I am interested, in talking a little more about how do we recognize these organizations? Where's the COLA line sit for those organizations that get the majority of their funding from Douglas County and honestly need to raise wages? Is it, if it's 50% or higher, do we say, hey, we'll do 50% of those wages, or will we do none of those wages? I think it becomes a challenge moving forward for those down the line, for those organizations to continue to exist if we turn down their COLA increases every time, because they'll provide less services in order to meet the wage needs of their valuable staff. So that is one placeholder that I have. And the second placeholder I have is something that Commissioner Reed has talked about multiple times, and that's around holistic defense and for misdemeanors, only for those who are assigned a KHD attorney and not a defense panel attorney. And I just want to keep talking about Kansas Holistic Defense and our holistic defense for misdemeanors on the whole. And is this the right place? Is raising the wages of those employees the right place to put the money, or do we need to set aside money for more holistic defense on the whole for all those who are being assigned a public defender for misdemeanors?
I appreciate those comments. I think that one thing about the COLA requests I'll say is I just put I meant to communicate a placeholder for kind of all the COLA requests, because by and large, maybe with an exception or two, I'm interested in or supportive of the idea of it. But as we discussed the other day, sort of how to arrive at that calculation is difficult. And I think one thing that's specific about KHD that is not necessarily true of certainly not all of our partners, but some of our partners, is that a number of their staff are 100% funded by the county. And so all of the work of those staff members are specific to the court-appointed counsel and services of indigent Douglas County defendants, whereas it's not exactly that sort of clear cut with a lot of our other funding agreements, right? And how positions are funded by a variety of funding sources and many other partners. So I think that's a little bit unique about this conversation. So I've thought a lot about that idea of the percentage of their overall budget that we are versus the service agreements that we have with them say that we are funding very explicit positions, and therefore maybe we have different responsibility to increases, because I do think it's a valid request. And KHD is an example of a partner that we know of a few examples of retention of some of their attorneys has been difficult because the pay is subpar to other, to bids, for one, in terms of defense counsel, but just in the legal community in general. And so it is a pressure point that has, that is real, I will say. And not all of those positions are attorney positions. Some of them are the support positions, an investigator position and a client advocate positions that do a lot of that support work that is not necessarily, there's not necessarily continuity or a way to measure whether or not those same types of services are available with the panel attorneys, as you mentioned, Commissioner Kelly. So I do think on a systemic level, which funding is a part of, right, but larger than funding, that there is a conversation to be had about defense counsel in Douglas County. A lot has changed in recent years. And so it's a personal goal for me that, as you know, we just recently adopted new bylaws for the CJCC, and we're moving into a phase of more strategic planning with our CJCC membership as we move. And to me, defense counsel is a big conversation for us to unpack. And I think that's one place to study it a little bit more broadly between bids, Kansas Holistic Defenders, and panel attorneys, in addition to juvenile defense, which is also, a much smaller piece of the conversation relative, but still a piece of the conversation and a fiduciary, tie to the county commission. So I think there is a big conversation to be had to understand better how it makes sense to both define what holistic defense looks like and create equity in the different types of court-appointed defense you may receive from Douglas County, and what does funding it look like, and how does that make sense in a way that is fair and sustainable for the county commission, and possible for us to be able to measure some degree of outcomes. I think when we talk about outcomes in criminal justice spaces, that gets to be a really tricky and convoluted conversation, and there's a lot of factors and a lot of entities that impact the outcome of a case. And so talking about only one element of a multi-elemental, a very dynamic situation in terms of how criminal cases process, it is difficult to, I think, understand. But I think all commissioners in previous conversations have communicated a desire to try and understand that better. And obviously we talk a lot here about making data-driven decisions, and this is a space where figuring out what stories the data tells us is tricky. So I think there's just more to unpack there. I am supportive of some increase for those positions that are 100% funded by the county, in particular, for retention purposes and for, I think that it's a valid request. I just don't know what that amount is. And then on a more long-term scale, I think, I am interested, similarly to the Senior Resource Center, although a very different ball of wax, so to speak, I am interested in the thoughts of the Kansas Holistic Defenders Board and staff about, and our, county staff about what could or would it look like to have that as a function of the county, have a department that maybe looks like bids, but for misdemeanor. I think those are all pieces of the conversation that, again, lots to unpack, but some of those things were mentioned in our hearing with KHD last week. And so I just want to, put it back out there that I think that's part of the larger long-term conversation. There's just been a lot of new elements to defense counsel in Douglas County, simultaneous to a lot of other changes and growth in programs and services across across the criminal justice system in general.
And if I can just add, let's not leave out the Douglas County panel attorneys as well. You know, if we believe we need to be responsible for raising pay for the Kansas Holistic Defenders attorneys, we probably need to raise the pay for those on the defense panel as well. It just seems like we need to play with how we structure the compensation for certain services here in this space, and especially compensation going forward as it relates to increases in wages.
I'll throw a couple other pieces into it. And one of the reasons that I didn't have anything written in for these requests, and one is that, and I'm happy to check my understanding of this, but it seemed like, you know, we're paying for, you know, certain amount, we're paying for staff salaries to meet a need. But they're also then on a top of that, taking contract work with bids or taking in, you know, outside work for outside pay that is not then offsetting what we're paying them. It's just rather taking time away from what we're paying them for. I'd need to understand a little more about that. Are we still getting what we paid for, or are they supplementing their salaries with work that takes away from our work? And that there was in terms of communication with them, they made a decision as an organization, as a nonprofit, to increase their wages substantially, and then just passed that off to us with an expectation, as opposed to having us be any part of the conversation around that. And because it does then, you know, have implications for what do we pay our panel attorneys, and how are we being equitable across that ecosystem too. So I just had a little heartburn over those two things. And some of those may mean we need some more conversations with them. I think there's more to talk about. I'm less interested at this point of having a conversation about what would that look like to pull that work back under the county umbrella than I am about the Senior Resource Center. I don't know if it's helpful to bundle those two into 1 year, if there's some kind of gain to that or not. But it's not been one I've been super excited about. But we're also still just getting into the data of how to compare panel attorney outcomes and Kansas Holistic Defender outcomes and prices and such. And I think we have some of that and some more that we can talk about in the fall. But there's still a lot of unknowns there for me.
I want to say I agree. I'm not interested in making it. I agree on the point of I'm not interested in making it a county department at this time. I don't think that's right for Kansas Holistic Defenders. If it was, we should have done it when we started. But I think there are similar themes across here when it comes to compensation of employees that are doing work on behalf of the county that is very specifically, and your point is a good one. If that is what we're paying for, that should be what they're doing, and that should only be what they're doing. And if they're taking on other work, to me, now it's starting to look like a panel attorney, right? If they're taking on other work, because the idea on a panel attorney is that you have some cases that maybe pay at a certain rate, but you have other cases outside of that, and that's what creates your entire portfolio and of income. If Kansas Holistic Defenders are operating that way, are they actually just a member of the defense panel that we're paying in a different way?
A note there that we'll try to bring back up those conversations this fall, but we won't make any modifications to the budget at this time.
So, but do we want to leave any money available to us in the commissioner's budget to have a conversation at a later time, or are we not interested in that? I think I could be persuaded either. That's not what I heard Sarah say, right? You were just saying we're denying that request and not setting any dollars aside. That's my question for my colleagues. Do we want to set some dollars aside for that conversation?
I do not have any dollars set aside for that conversation, and I'm comfortable with that. I think I think there's a lot of things we need to talk about, and hopefully we'll talk about in the shortly. But I didn't see the need to pencil in money for that at this time. But Commissioner?
I'm comfortable deferring to no increases, in part because I'm not sure what the right answer is for what that amount could or should be. It's not the amount that they requested. And clearly from this conversation, there's just a lot of open-ended questions in general that I think are more important for us to zero in on before we increase further.
I'm fine with that.
We've tackled a couple of things. Do we want to take a short break? And then I think we're going to dive into the mental health sales tax. Would that be the next order of operations?
Yeah, we can dive into that, or we can show you where we're at on the mill levy, either one, so. But we can do the behavioral health. Let's just check on that first.
Okay, do you all want to break before we do that, or keep going? Okay, we're going to have a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back at 10:12.
So, commissioners, we'd like to kind of show you the behavioral health sales tax spreadsheet. Brooke, let me move you into the panel. And one of the things I want to make sure we've got everything in there that the commissioners talked about. And then also I want to talk about ongoing resources in this fund and ongoing expenses, and have this conversation about capacity. So Brooke, whenever you're ready, I think you could throw it up. And maybe you can you just walk us through revenues and walk us down? Commissioners, I'd focus your attention on column V.
Certainly. Thank you, Sarah. Brooke Sauer, Douglas County Finance Manager. So the mental health sales tax spreadsheet, here we've got our values plugged in for the sales tax revenue, the transfer from general to support behavioral health projects, and then rent that's received for the treatment and recovery center that's noted on the miscellaneous revenue line. And then below, I've backed out all of the one-time expenditures that could this fund could be used to, for those programs. And really, this is just the ongoing operational support from this fund. What you'll see here is that for the revenue, we've got about $12,669,000 in ongoing revenues to support this fund. And then if I could kind of go a little bit faster, we've got $11,109,000 ongoing operational support. So you're looking at about $1,559,000 that could be used to support ongoing programs from this fund.
And Brooke, does this include like the new position for O'Connell and that commissioners discussed last week, and the additional funds for DECA?
It includes the additional funds for Burt Nash, DECA for behavioral health court, DECA, the drug court, court alternatives program, and then the behavioral health director with benefits.
Okay, so those are the ones that would be transferring from the general fund to this fund. I'm talking about the other brand new requests. I don't think we have those in yet.
No, I do not have anything for O'Connell in here yet.
So I think commissioners last week talked about O'Connell, additional funds for DECA for drug court. For MAT, I apologize. DECA for MAT. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I would characterize that not as DECA funds. DECA estimated additional funds to support MAT, but we now have 3 providers that provide MAT. And so I would recharacterize that as dollars that would be increased for MAT across the partners as we proposed in the priority sheet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if that's what commissioners want, we need some clarity on that.
I do want to note that the Heartland MAT is listed in here. That's the only MAT I have.
And that MAT plus basically, Bob, I think what we would probably end up doing here is moving substance use to kind of its own little subcategory.
Yeah.
With a couple of those, so, and then that would be viewed as a pool similar to how we look at psychiatric. So that, on that list, it would be the $227,500. It's currently aligned to Heartland MAT, the 309 for peer-led
For social detox.
and then the $236,000 for SUD treatment for the uninsured. So those, Brooke, can you add those three lines up? Yep. 773,609, and then your funding for Mirror would probably also be included in that. Is that true, Bob?
Right, so that would be higher. So what we did was we put the funding for Mirror and then DECA's request for additional funds to support uninsured and underinsured individuals for MAT. And the reason we did that, commissioners, was because when we started supporting MAT treatment, that was exclusively happening at Heartland Health. Now with the Treatment and Recovery Center, MAT can be initiated at the Treatment and Recovery Center. Ongoing treatment can be provided by DECA or Mirror Inc. Short-term intervention and treatment can also happen at Heartland Health. So we were trying to say, how much are we proposing to spend on MAT? What do we need to spend on MAT? And then developing a process in the second half of the year where our partners who would be doing this work would actually be invoicing the county when treatment happens versus giving the agency an allocation that they could use to provide MAT. The process of providing MAT has become a little bit more complex and dispersed because the requirements to do MAT have resulted in there are more providers scattered across our partners, if that makes sense. Also, there's been a change in capacity with DECA. We started working with DECA 3 years ago. Social detox was available at their options facility in Wichita and also at First Step. DECA is no longer offering social detox as a service that they provide. And so, DECA is paying ADU for social detox services. That doesn't make sense to me anymore.
Within the, what we were just talking about there, the Mirror Inc. is listed as a one-time.
Correct. And that was to stand up and staff the housed intensive outpatient program, a substance use treatment program with the Cardinal Project. So both requests from Cardinal are one-time dollars.
And so it's not showing up on the sheet right now because I'm trying to focus on ongoing versus ongoing, but we still have it.
Right, it came up in that conversation and I wasn't sure if we were counting it here.
Yep, correct. Brooke's got me straightened out.
So the total pool, the total pool for medication-assisted treatment amongst our variety of partners is what amount now?
This would be a larger pool for all substance use disorder treatment dollars, so not just MAT.
So what we were proposing is that the services that could be billed for uninsured and underinsured people would include residential treatment, intensive outpatient, and MAT. Those services are initiated when a person is in crisis or is struggling intensely with their addiction.
And that's sitting at around $775,000. It's like 773. Unless the commissioners want to allocate more towards that.
Is that 775,000 or 773,000, including the 172?
That does not include that.
Okay. And do we have a good accounting of how much of that pool currently is used, needed, beyond what is?
So commissioners, this is one of the reasons why we're proposing this consolidation is so that we could get that. Basically, Heartland Health has had a $227,000 allocation, which started off as community partner dollars. Then we asked them to, how are you going to target that? And they said, we're going to do MAT dental services. Essentially what that meant was they added a dental hygienist. So we've been trying with Heartland over the last couple of years to get a firmer handle on what are these dollars paying for and what treatment services are happening as a result, specifically to uninsured and underinsured. It has been very difficult to get to that data point so that we can really understand what those treatment dollars are paying for. So by doing this, we would offer all of our partners the ability, when you have a client who's uninsured and they need services, you know you have a base allocation for that, and you could bill quarterly or twice a year based on that allocation. That would also allow us to do what each substance use provider does every year, which is to reconfigure that and try to make sure that they don't run out of dollars halfway through the year. So they make decisions sort of based on what their base allocation is. Now, another piece of this is a project like the Social Detox Project has also changed in how it's structured over the years and who it serves. But if one agency is not able to provide the peers to offer that service, that means that service is not offered to clients in the community. It's offline. If Mirror is offering that service and Heartland Radar can plug people into that service, and DECA can offer the same thing they did if they're staffed, but if they're not staffed, and Mirror is, we can get people to those services without disruption.
So have we already pulled those funds back into a pool that we have some accountability over and a variety of partners can come for that? Or are they still held under line items that go with each of those partners?
This year, 2024, they are still held under those agency-specific allocations. What we're proposing to do as we move into this next budget in 2025 is to change that whole structure. And this would be the outcome or the benefits of changing to that structure. The county would know more specifically who is getting served and to what degree they're getting served. And again, in terms of a priority population, we are trying to offset the costs of those who are uninsured or underinsured. When I say underinsured in the substance use space, that means men have fewer federal dollars in the federal block grant, and we've been trying to address that for several years, and I think have addressed that. But we're really trying to target an individual who is homeless or experiencing homelessness, who needs detox services, and whatever team is serving that person knows that they can get that person into a provider who's close, and that service will be paid for. And that's how in terms of brass tacks, that's how you avoid having somebody who's living in a tent who needs social detox services and they die in the tent, which happened this year.
So how did you arrive at the 172,497 as the needed additional pool?
I simply took the allocation that DECA said they needed for additional MAT services and proposed to move that there. I would anticipate that when we look at this at the end of 2025, there would be dollars left over. I would think that we probably might be over budgeting for that, but I would just say, I don't know that we'd be over budget. We just don't know until we start doing
I'm
this.
not sure we have that in.
We don't have that in. The 172 is a supplemental request that has not been built in yet.
Okay. All right.
So that's a question. Would you want to build that in or would you not want to build that in? Would you want to maintain just what we have, or do you want to have more capacity? I would anticipate there will be more demand with this structure.
Brooke, can you send us this, or Cammie or someone send us the spreadsheet that you just put up there? Because I don't think we've seen that version before.
You have a version in your book, but it is got all the one-times included. It's
Okay.
under the summary tab. You have it in your book. It's just got all of the one-time requests included, and I was trying to strip those out.
Okay.
But we can certainly send it to you.
Yeah.
I just don't want it needs to be clear that it is just ongoing to ongoing.
Just ongoing, yeah.
So I guess one of the questions would be, commissioners last week identified that, like, O'Connell, an additional truancy position for O'Connell, that there was support for adding And then there was discussion about adding it out of the behavioral health sales tax.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to figure out from this spreadsheet and the one up there, where our balance is, how much are we spending down of the behavioral health sales tax?
We're not. We still have capacity of $1.5 million ongoing revenue in that fund.
Right. That's what I think I saw on that sheet that I wanted to grab.
Yeah, when you take the 6.6 million plus the transfer from the general fund of 5.2 million plus the rent from Bert Nash, so that's 873,000. And you add, that would be the ongoing revenue amounts. And then if you go all the way down to the bottom on this one, since Brooke's taken out the one-time dollars.
This was also where we had the discussion about the opioid funds and decided that if this is ongoing, not putting it in opioid funds, but we also didn't decide what we were doing with that. Does that,
Well, opioid funds we have in the past use allocations to pay for naloxone distribution. It has to be maintained in a separate fund. So based off of how it's designed. And so I really don't mix the two. I really think of them separately, and really the opioid funds, I would not count on us receiving a consistent amount year from year. Our drop off this year has been significantly less than what we got last year. And I think there's a lot of front loading of those distributions to us. So the current balance in that fund is around 290. And I would prefer us to just allocate that out in chunks on one-time things. Like we did for naloxone.
And you will, there are ongoing expenses if you want to continue that naloxone supply. So for example, the vending machine at the transportation center is currently moving 100 units of naloxone a month. So we will very quickly be out of naloxone to stock the vending machine. We've talked with the city about picking up that, but that is, we're not there with any commitment.
Or we could come back to you and say, based off of what we're distributing and what the shelf life is, commissioners, we need another allocation to stock the vending machines.
so because it's coming from opioid funds, that would be something we could entertain outside of the budget timeframe?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
And we're spending it in arrears. From my perspective, we're accumulating the funds and then we're allocating it out. We're not projecting and forecasting because it's about impossible to forecast. Yeah, and we included it in your packet last week and I sent it to you on Friday. Yeah.
so I want to make sure I understand the 5.195687 that we transfer from general, right? That hits our mill levy,
Correct.
right? And so this almost feels like a little bit of a shell game if we're moving money out of mill levy into the behavioral health sales tax fund, right? And now, as commissioners, we're talking about moving things out of the mill levy and to the behavioral sales tax. I mean, we're just moving it around.
Shell game is
Shell
a
game's probably a
pejorative
bad
term.
word, yes,
What I
but
would say
yes.
is there's multiple ways to accomplish commission goals on how to achieve it. Why we consolidated this fund is that before the behavioral health sales tax was in place, there was at least $5 million of behavioral health projects coming out of the general fund. And it became very complicated for us to remember what's paid out of the general fund and what's paid out of the sales tax fund. So when we did this last year and we moved it together, we moved the mill levy that supported those projects previously because there was a lot of indication that the behavioral health sales tax should be to enhance programs, to expand services, not necessarily to relieve the mill levy. That's what I heard in 2018 when we passed it. So that's why we have that transfer in there. Now, what we are saying is, you're right, you could either move general fund expenses to this fund like we've already done some of that in here with behavioral health court, drug court, and those, and we still have capacity. So you could decide to lessen your transfer, that transfer of 5.2 2 million, you could lessen that transfer. Or you could move, I mean, the problem is once you move it over, I really feel like it needs to have a specific purpose for that. I don't, it needs to be tied to behavioral health, just so we have some kind of clarity of our fund structure.
Well, and one concern as I listened to the discussion last week was if you move justice service programs and programs that are in the sheriff's budget, the accountability for how those dollars are being spent and how those dollars continue to be budgeted moving forward, or additional expenses that are needed, are kind of dispersed and spread among 3 internal departments that become challenging.
And I'm not sure that I am on board with that. I think putting these that are, like services in the same behavioral health budget helps us look at them all in one place. And I think that's one of the pieces that I have been uncomfortable with like our specialty courts, is that they're nobody's baby. There's a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, DA, the sheriff, our budget. I think we need a place where we can look at them all in one place. So I've been comfortable with this idea of moving some of these like remaining pieces that are behavioral health out of the general fund into the behavioral health sales tax, but not chasing them then with mill levy, not adding to that allocation, so that instead of increasing the fund balance in that sales tax, that we are using those dollars for those purposes, in addition to consolidating some of our concepts together and relieving some mill levy. So those are my thoughts.
So Commissioner, to speak to that, the one suggestion or possible alternative to get to the same objective, which is to move dollars from mill levy to the sales tax, would be to consider grouping what you move. So for example, if you were to group behavioral health court and mental health services in the jail, those are all Burt Nash programs, and we could look at that cost overall in the context of how it's impacting the behavioral health sales tax. The same would be true for substance use programs. That could be something that could also be considered. If you were to group it as I just described, it would actually give you $611,000 instead of $540,000 that you're removing, and that would allow us to make decisions based on what the actual demand was for those services in the SUD realm and the mental health realm.
I want you to pull out the budget book and show me where it's at, and maybe we can do that offline later, because I want the object codes.
It's $611,000 versus $519,000.
Yeah, I just want to see the object codes.
Yeah.
And I also want to address something else. I want to be clear. We are smart enough and work closely enough with the sheriff that if you move these programs over, we're still going to get, a great support. The sheriff, I do not think this will have diluted accountability. We can work together to make sure it's managed properly.
I'm trying to make sense of this because in my mind, it doesn't. I agree with Commissioner Willie. I want to spend down some of the balance in our behavioral health sales tax fund. If there's a reason staff feels like we shouldn't do that, I'd like to hear that.
I'd like to tell you one.
Yes.
So this year, if we move back to conversations about one-time dollars, you allocated over $2 million to one-time projects that will go towards spending that fund balance down. We really have not, I think we're really in the beginning stages of having those conversations with partners, both internal to our community and in other places, about that potential. And so I really think that once the word gets out that we have fund balance available for supportive housing in this community, we will have more projects coming to us. And ultimately, I'd like us to crawl before we walk, before we run. So if you were to say spend $10 million in 1 year on supportive housing projects, I'm not sure we could accomplish it. We're still struggling to get all the ARP Act projects spent. So I think the notion of having segregated funding for one-time resources and spend down that balance on appropriate things as they come to us is completely appropriate. and it aligns with the strategic plan in place for everyone.
Another consideration would be that the services that we've brought online in the last 2 years are in their infancy. So if we were successful at diverting 911 calls toward mobile response or alternative response, the question would be, what is that response? Because it currently doesn't exist. And what will it cost to increase the number of mobile teams or the configuration of mobile teams? Those demands will continue to come, as will requests for operational support for the Youth Crisis Center. These programs are in their infancy. We are 18 months into them being online and figuring out what they cost, and the demand for those services will continue to increase.
And the premise of spending those dollars and having these programs is that they should relieve pressure on our other emergency services and should save us dollars in those other areas. So I don't ever want to lose track that that is part of what we are up to with spending upstream dollars, is that we are not then spending those same dollars again on, increased response from emergency services, to which are incredibly expensive. I think these are dollars that are well spent for that, but the fact that those dollars should only be chased by more dollars is not something that I am comfortable with. I think we need to be really accountable for where are the savings that come because of that. And I know that there's a lag time, but that is also what we have communicated with the community that is part of the purpose of the work. So in terms of one-time dollars from this fund, what have we earmarked so far?
Well, if you go down to the bottom, our supportive housing projects there. So the Cardinal Housing Network, Family Promise Capital, which is actually the 9th Street Missionary Baptist Project, the $800,000 for housing supports from DECA, and $750,000 to help build a family shelter. Plus the $58,000 for suicide prevention programming with Lawrence Douglas County Public Health. And then the mirror money. Where is that? I didn't think she had it in.
That is not built in yet.
Oh, I thought we had.
Where is it?
Yeah, we need to check it. What
Okay.
line do you? Okay. We'll make sure, we will look for that. It's not in there. I didn't see it. So I would put that in because we've talked about that it's
So-
associated with the Cardinal Housing Project Network.
124,818 was the Mirror Inc. one-time request.
I believe that maybe if you could scroll to intervention, is there a line in? No, there's no line there for mirror.
Yeah, I don't think it's in.
It's not in.
But that's not one time, that's ongoing, correct?
No, it's one time.
Okay. So commissioners, I think it would be helpful to me to get some clarity on what our task is here, because I hear Bob saying it would be helpful if we consolidated some funds into one grouping. I can see how that will be helpful, but to me, that really doesn't impact the dollars are still there.
Yeah, I don't-
Whether it's in general fund or behavioral sales tax that seems like I mean, if you were those partners, I can see maybe they'd want it a certain way, and I can see our administration may want it a different way, but I don't know that really.
I hear you. I think your tasks right now are some small ones. One, what do you want to do with O'Connell? Do you want it to come out of here, or do you want it to come out of general fund? Are you okay with, Brooke, if you scroll up to what we have moved over from the general fund so far, which was behavioral health court, drug court, and court alternatives, and the behavioral health projects director salary. That's all we moved over. If you're okay with those things, then I would, or is there anything else? And then are you fine with the transfer amount, or do you want to change anything else with that? Those are the three questions I have for you on this fund.
I'm pretty comfortable with how this impacts the capacity in that fund. I think the one-time requests are an entirely appropriate use of this. It leaves us that flexibility in the long run for other things that may be coming down the pike. The amount that we have in ongoing feels sustainable to me in this with the allocation, the transfer that we have, but not adding to or subtracting to that at this time. That's my thought. Commissioners, what do you think?
I think I would generally agree with that. I do, there's one other one-time request I think we talked about last week. The specialty court evaluation coming. Sarah, you have that on the list? Okay. that was
Another
the other one I
one-time
had.
thing that we did move over here too, Brooke. So we need a one-time allocation for the specialty court evaluation, 150.
150,000.
Yeah.
So,
And then the 45 for O'Connell, is that reflected here or not?
No, I need some
that's
direction
the
on where you
open-ended
want.
question. That one's a little less clear for me. I don't feel super compelled to move that over here, but I think that might be because the other, I mean, we're
Maybe-
talking about O'Connell's entire budget because then, or just this one.
I think just this one, and I think that what I want to be cautious of is us not getting lost in whether it's out of behavioral health sales tax or general fund, and do we want to fund it at all? You know, I think when we said, well, it can come out of behavioral health sales tax, then we sort of put it on the back burner. We may need to come back to it to see, like, is this something that we want to do? And then does it belong in behavioral health sales tax, or does it belong in the general fund? Remembering that there's $5.2 million that we transferred from the general fund to behavioral health sales tax, so.
I would say that having one position for truancy paid for out of the general fund and one position out of the behavioral health sales tax is going to be a pain, just
I
internally.
agree, yes.
I would recommend that we put that placeholder for the 45,000 for the one position in the general fund, and then we evaluate that also when we're looking at mill levy as a whole. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's not coming out of the behavioral health fund. So then.
That's two of your questions
that was
answered, right, Sarah?
One of them, I guess my other one is there anything else you wanted to add? Are you good with those are the only things that's in orange there on rows 14 through A19 that we have moved over from the behavioral health, or from the sales tax fund, the general fund to the behavioral health sales tax fund? The 150 for the specialty court study is new this year and it's one time. So it's really,
Did we get the 58,000 for,
yeah, it's down there.
okay, I'm just,
Yeah, this
There it
has all of the things that I had flagged, and then the ones that we're kind of relying on staff to make sure that we kind of gave looked at all of the options for that.
Mhm.
And is this, Sarah, this is something you're comfortable with, accounting for them in this area? Okay.
So then what we're going to try to do is then do a summary total of what has been moved from the general fund to the behavioral health fund ongoing and see what its mill levy impact will be.
The line we haven't talked about is the mill levy reduction amount. I mean, in terms of, that's in our commissioner's budget. That can move over unless we have funds that we would like to keep within that line item for particular projects. Like, is that where we want to hold funds if we have a conversation with senior resources? Is that the appropriate place to put it? And other than those items, does all of that then move over for mill levy reduction?
It would be cut. Let's call it a cut.
Right.
I don't know if you're quite ready to do that yet. Do you guys, do you want it, should we go over? And I guess we still are, I want us to double check those numbers on what we're, moving to the general. So, I mean, anything we would do at this point would be very tentative while we continue to just check what we moved over. But we could throw that spreadsheet up if you want.
And I'm okay if we need to take a break, manage that spreadsheet, and then share it? Or have we answered many of today's questions, and then that is the work that is appropriate for tomorrow's deliberations?
Maybe before we take a break to figure that out, I want to talk about the request that we have from staff to merge. That seems like we haven't talked about it yet, and what we think, whether to merge group services out at the jail. Am I saying that right?
Yes, but what I was hearing was that you're comfortable with where we went last week.
I'm not sure what number you're talking about, Bob, on the jail number. I can't find it. So we could
Mental
do
health
that over the break.
services at the jail was $347,000.
That is-
was on there's a spreadsheet from
Yeah.
Cami that has all of these things
Yeah,
listed.
and that has not been moved over at this point.
That has not been moved over. Correct.
That's why I was clarifying when we showed that it's just the behavioral health court and drug court and court alternatives plus Bob's salary are the only ones we've moved over.
And maybe to the idea of merging behavioral health court, maybe a possibility is we have built into the budget an analysis of behavioral health court and drug court. Maybe we let that process work its way out before we merge all those things together. That's just an idea. That may be a bad idea.
Commissioners, I would actually recommend that we let staff dig through that and come up with a recommendation, and that we take a 5-minute recess. That's all right.
Well, I wonder if more than 5 minutes would be helpful for staff based on that task. But I also, I think what I hear Commissioner Kelly trying to flush out is whether or not we as a commission think that moving all those specialty court lines over now does it make sense, or is it premature to the evaluation? I think that's what I essentially heard you ask Commissioner Kelly.
Well, and is what I heard from Bob, and maybe I heard it incorrectly, is to merge that into one specialty court budget line rather than being specific to different agencies. Is that what I heard?
Yes. What I was saying, and I don't want to create confusion, let's talk at the break, was if you wanted to move, let's talk at the break.
Yeah.
Well, let staff have a conversation. We'll come back and ask the same questions, and we'll take a 10-minute recess and come back at 11 o'clock.
And anything we talk about at the break, we will then, I would rather us not talk about it. Are you saying staff talk about it?
Staff will
Okay,
staff will
gonna
check
talk
its
about it at the
numbers.
break.
That's what I'm
We will
saying.
come in 10 minutes
Thank you.
and hear what they have to say. Thank you. All right, we're recessed. Hello, welcome back. And I think we might get some download from staff. What did you talk about?
Okay, so yeah, we clarified the amount moved over and made sure that we had consensus on it. This includes costs associated with specialty courts that are sitting in the criminal justice services budget, does not include any services inside the sheriff's budget. And that total of what we've moved over is $767,172. And it is the expense associated with the Director of Behavioral Health Projects and just those specialty courts.
Can you put that spreadsheet up so we can see what
Yep.
that looks like?
Cammie, you want to share your little one, where it adds up that we just reconciled, you know what I'm saying? Because I think that's what she wants to see. That one, yep.
So this is from the sheet that we were given yesterday with some options. There were behavioral health court, drug court, and then behavioral health courts, behavioral health salary plus the benefits. Is that where we are? Okay,
So it's
yeah,
everything in the
that's what
first
adds up.
subtotal, not the second subtotal. So it's the $767,172 from the first subtotal.
Right, and just talk us through the rationale for not moving those other two. Is that not now, or is that?
I would
Not
want
at
to talk to
all.
the sheriff before on the inmate services contract. I mean, we've not had a conversation with the sheriff, so I'd like to talk to him about that. And then also the Heartland Rate Act positions. I think we have to have larger conversations about, are we just moving that portion of it? Why not the whole it's the same thing with O'Connell, like we're only, it just gets complicated. And those are currently, the sheriff uses those to support his substance use treatment in the jail. So I would also want the sheriff to be included in those conversations.
We very much appreciate the staff recommendation on that.
Okay.
So thank you.
One more clarity if you come back. I don't think MAT I wouldn't put MAT on that line.
You wouldn't
Addiction
call it
counselor
MAT.
services are staffing for two
Yeah, so just
positions
don't call it
at the
MAT.
jail.
But just to put a point on it, those, I don't think I heard from staff that those two are maybe not ideal to move over or do anything with right now. And unless any commissioner has a strong feeling that we need to dig in more, I think those are just non-relevant conversations for today. And we're only talking about those 5 lines up above.
I think at this point, I'm comfortable with running with that. As we look at kind of final mill levy, we may kind of just have that as an option, but I agree that there's some conversations that we need to happen with partners. I mean, sheriff, et cetera.
That's what I had, after all, that's what I think I had in my budget earlier on, and that I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, what tasks are yet ahead of us?
So, I mean, I think we're pretty close if we want to start talking about mill levy and then kind of tied to that could be CIP transfers with that. So Kim, you want to throw it up? This is the combined commissioner's decision worksheet, and it is reflective of the decisions you've made so far on the general fund. So commissioners, you're going to want to look at the line that, the column that's D, which is the 2025 recommended budget. E is where the adjustment is made that would impact that mill levy, or then if column F is really if it was funded with one-time dollars, and then that ends up on column G as sort of the results of that on the mill levy. And then Q and R are just some notes related to those. So really we have the row 13, which is the CIP capital projects. Just to remind everyone, this is the amount of funds that we transfer from the general fund to CIP for pay-as-you-go financing of our infrastructure related to road and bridges in the unincorporated area and facilities. If you want to put more one-time dollars into things, this is really the most appropriate place to do it. So as long as the funding amount of $5,377,380 is that dollar amount stays the same, because that is what Brooke and Chad have been working on to bring you a proposed CIP for 2025, whether that comes from that ongoing mill levy dedication or from some one-time dollars is really, we can have that conversation. So we had talked about the road and bridge transfer. And just remember here, like, as we were talking about, for you all at this stage, a static dollar amount is helpful because then you know how it translates to mill levy. For us, I would rather us shoot a little high and come under that fund balance target. So at the overview, I told you $413,000 would bring the road and bridge fund down to 25%. Well, percentages change depending on dollar amounts. So like 425 seems like a nice round number to me, or 450, something like that. But that would bring their that would bring Road and Bridge fund balance down a little further, but I think that's fine. And so if that transfer were made, we could, and I'm confident it can be made. It just, I think with the auditors, it may take a circuitous path, depending on what the auditors tell us. It may have to come back into the general fund and then come back out to CIP. We're trying to see if it can go straight from Road and Bridge to CIP, and we're asking the auditors. So if we did that, it would basically, it would lower what commissioners are putting towards the CIP transfer mill levy amount of that 5 million. So we would show it as a decrease here, but we would leave some notes that would tell us that that transfer would be coming from Road and Bridge. Does that make sense, commissioners?
Yes, but only because we've been
Okay.
talking about it now for a little while. And I had penciled in the 500,000, which maybe is an overshoot, but the intention of that change was to manage that Road and Bridge into CIP and yet relieve the general fund with it. So your recommendation then is the 425?
I'm going to have Cammie do the math of what 500,000 would do to their fund balance
Okay.
and what it would leave that fund balance percentage at. So that's one of them. And then as Commissioner Kelly alluded to, and I'm going to steal your computer here since I gave you a job. On the commissioner's line item, which is all the way down here. Here we go. On this budget, it is a row 76. We are holding the excess capacity in the general fund where we could lower the mill levy. As we identified, someone with a budget book, is around 4.9 million
It was
that.
4,970,498 was from our budget book.
So commissioners, that's what we have identified as unallocated funds in the general fund that could be available for mill levy reduction or for additional supplemental requests.
And I know we haven't scrolled down this far yet, but we had talked about the leaving some dollars allocated for the conversation with Senior Resource Center. Is this where that would park?
Yes.
Okay. One other small thing that came up Friday that I don't remember if we finished the discussion about was the grant match for broadband proposals. And it's a small amount. It's 10, I think we had decided it'd be 10,000 per application. And of course, it only pays if they're successful and get their grant and actually build broadband infrastructure. Do we have a placeholder for that? Do we have that yet? Or should we, it stayed in the commissioner's budget last time, did it not?
Actually, I don't even think we allocated any funds for it because it's such a small dollar amount, Commissioner, that if we have some flexibility in our budget that if we need to pay one of those, we can.
I just didn't want that program to go away.
No, the program will not go away.
Okay.
So what we show here, and I'm going to scroll up so that you can kind of see a little better. It's not the bottom of the screen. So we have gone ahead and taken this row 77 reflects the cut. Oops, one more down. No, this reflects that $767,172 that we're reducing the general fund mill levy by because of moving those expenses to the behavioral health sales tax. So we've already adjusted that mill levy there. So, hold on a second. Commissioners, we decided that we're still showing the MAT. We did not take that in.
You're down in mental
Yep,
health.
I know, but I think we took that out.
They decided on it the other day. They decided to take
But then
out
didn't you
the
just
typical-
today decided to take it out on the DECA MAT dollars? Did you include that additional funds?
So I didn't understand that we wanted to take it out, but maybe I missed what other commissioners said. What I recall from our conversation last week and a little bit reflected in my notes is talking about, well, and then we talked more about it today, the pool of money. We talked about that coming out of mental health sales tax, for sure, I thought. And I thought we were all in agreement about that. And maybe today provided us with a little clarity that it's not a DECA-specific budget allocation, but rather an addition to that pool of money that Bob was just describing that we are moving towards for the 2025 budget, if commissioners agree with that direction.
So
Does that feel like an accurate summary?
Yes.
An additional $172,497 allocated towards substance use disorder work in
From the mental health.
The
fund.
behavioral health sales,
Got it, yeah. We're not calling it MAT, we're just calling it SUD.
but it is not built in yet.
Well, now it sounds like it is.
Was not.
So that number that we just talked about, that 767,172 is now gonna adjust a little bit, right? I'm just trying to track the conversation for public in case anybody's paying attention.
And so this, right now on the blue column G, it is tracking, okay, it is tracking where we are with the mill levy right now. So it's reduced, with that reduction, we're down to 4.3657 compared to where we started at 44.208. Does that make sense? So commissioners, you see that? So then if we make more adjustments on this line, 76, then it will adjust that more. And then Cammie, yeah, she's going to tell you those amounts on Road and Bridge.
Yeah, so Road and Bridge can handle a transfer of $500,000 or $450,000, depending on what you decide. It is, both of those changes are within the 23% fund balance range.
So each of those would hit 23%.
Yeah, one is 23.7% and one is 23.5.
Commissioners, how do you feel about a $500,000 transfer? And the range for that fund is between 19% and 25% is kind of the, for fund balance, correct? That's the target?
It sounds like perhaps in the grand scheme of things, it's a fairly negligible difference. Perhaps it's fair to say. I'm having a little bit of discomfort from it just because of the number given to us by Public Works. So maybe, I mean, I got a little stuck on that number and have just been doing math with that number. I was rounding up to 420,000 just for a roundness, but if other commissioners aren't feeling that way, or if staff feel confident that it leaves things healthy, then I'm open to that higher amount.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with it. Similar to Commissioner Reed, I want to be thoughtful about what staff thought that we could do, and that pushes a little deeper, and it just makes me yeah, I'm okay with that.
So 500?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. So we'll make a note that the amount will stay static at the recommended budget amount and that of $5,377,380. So we, couple options, I think we could, I guess I'd like we could just wait and give you the spreadsheet and you could think about it overnight and we could come back tomorrow morning and really talk about the amount of mill levy reduction commissioners are comfortable with. Or we could start to have some conversations if there's some scenarios or projections you want staff to prepare for you.
I think the overnight is not a bad idea. They have us each just kind of, if Cami can resend that document, and we go through some of the decisions that we've talked through together and see if indeed that's really where our comfort level is, if there's anything else that needs to be talked about, and look at that final mill levy reduction and come back in the morning. Are there other pieces or parts that we would need to tackle before then?
No, I think that's fine. I just want to spend some time doing some calculations to figure out where that is and go back to SRC and look at that again to see if we can get a number. I
And that
think
may
all
be-
commissioners would do the same, yeah.
And that may be worth a quick discussion about, were you going to do some calculations to see where you came up with yours? And I said mine was not especially sophisticated.
Yeah, and I think it may be good to, if staff has a recommendation there on, if there are additional dollars, and maybe you don't, and that's fine, and we just need to make a choice.
And this budget is reflecting a new position for O'Connell out of mill levy.
I think my only request
Is
is
it?
I just want to make sure that we are
They just said they didn't want to do that.
on the
no,
same.
So I apologize. I guess it is coming out of behavioral health sales tax. So I would like
Thought
some
we decided
direction
not
on that
to do
before we leave.
I didn't understand. I thought we decided to leave it in the general fund because
That's
it's,
what they've been saying.
but I know we talked in a few circles to figure out where the center was again before, but I wanted to clarify, we were all in agreement about that position. It's not an example of a set aside or sort of parking it in the commissioner's budget like we talked about with SRC. Are there others that we talked about setting aside and parking in the commissioner's budget? I just want to make sure I have that top of mind for looking back through these tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I had put three things in my budget there. One was some money for Douglas County Extension, and we didn't really talk about that. And then we talked about Holistic Defenders, and we talked about Senior Resource Center. I get the feeling that commissioners are not supportive of setting aside some money for Kansas Holistic Defenders, so I'm going to take that off my list. But I didn't know about Douglas County Extension. We sort of talked about that, and that maybe commissioners are fine, if.
No, that's excellent to flag, because that was the beginning of our discussion about what we're going to do with COLA requests, and then we haven't circled back to it. And I know I had parked some money there for that before we moved on from it, so that may be another thing we can either talk about now, or we can come back with some proposals.
Thank you. I knew there was another one that we talked about last week and it just was not top of mind. Extension was it. It feels like it might be a good use of our time today to talk a little bit about extension, and I mean, I'll go back to SRC a little bit to figure out some approach to determining numbers there, because it does feel like otherwise we're
Yeah, it seems like some
Close.
conversation now, yeah.
So for senior resources, I had put up as a placeholder that 220,000. If that's just a conversation starter, is that too high, too low?
Could I request a 5-minute break to do some math? And then I feel like I could answer that question. I just want to sort of go back through my math again to see where I think those numbers are. I think I could do that and Douglas County Extension and have a better conversation about it rather than doing math on the fly here.
That sounds good to me. I want to ask one other thing. Staff, are there other lines or question marks that you feel unclear about other than the mill levy reduction in the commissioner's line and these two community partners that we just flagged? Okay, just wanted to see if there's any unfinished.
I think our questions are answered.
Okay.
Okay, with that, we will recess for 5 minutes and come back at 11:30. Okay, I think we're back. We were giving Commissioner Kelly some time for some math to talk about what a possible placeholder might be for Senior Resource Center. And if you're not ready, I have another question for staff. Okay. One of the pieces we haven't circled back to yet is, of course, the fire department, that we have a proposal in our budget that is built into our budget. And then there's some conversations with the city about whether or not that will be the final. Have there been any other discussions, any updates or things that we should build in as a known or build in as a not yet known?
Commissioners, I spoke to city finance staff and city LDCFM staff on Friday afternoon, and they are preparing various scenarios to take back to the city commission related to if they restore 4 to an apparatus and if they still maintain the additional medic unit. And they have a lot of different scenarios they're running through. I think in my professional opinion, it's about impossible for me at this time to calculate any sort of additional amount of capacity I would need to accommodate what they end up with. You should know that, we did build in additional funding related to the expansion. So we do have some capacity inside there for that. And I just don't see how it's going to get resolved before we wrap up.
And I think one of the things that we're keeping in mind is if there is a surprise that comes in after we've finished our budget time, like that money has to be found. It
Yes.
can probably come out of fund balance in the initial year, correct?
Yes.
And then need to be built in after the fact. So I do think that next year will be a very different budget picture in terms of, I think there will be far fewer places for us to cut next year. I think we've found some things that I'm comfortable digging into, but those won't be there next year. So just kind of keeping in mind that whatever mill levy reduction we're able to do this year will not likely be followed up with the same kind of valuation increases and the same kind of one-time funds that we could pull back in to do some tax relief.
So some of the things I thought about are we ready to move on to senior resource? Some of the things I thought about, I think we're probably not far off from that 220, but some things for commissioners I would encourage us to think about is currently the Senior Resource Center gets $7,500 from the city. I would assume that we probably wouldn't do a partnership agreement with the city on that, and we would expect that funding to go away. Be great if it could happen, but, and then there is $79,000 worth of contributions that are there. I think there's a way to create a contribution fund for senior, so that may not entirely go away, but I would expect that there would be a decline in contributions. We don't collect a ton of money when we move things to being county departments. It becomes sort of something different. So I would just ask us to think about a 250 number instead of 220, just to give us a little room.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that these are dollars to begin a conversation, they may be used, they may not be used. But with the uncertainty around the fire department, not having a placeholder for that would be a little uncomfortable if we wanted to rely on it.
Yeah, I think we'd have an increased benefits cost, so that takes in their cost for benefits, what they're paying now. It might be higher for us down the line. I want to give us options here and not reduce our options. So going a little higher to me feels a little better. I recognize that we may not spend it because Senior Resource Center may say that's not something we're interested in, and then we'll have to make other decisions.
But we've also taken other things from one-time funds, from fund balance, that if that turned back to it, we still will have made some strides on spending down also. So I'm comfortable with that amount.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the 250, and I think that the logic of going a little bit higher makes sense, and it's a relatively negligible amount in the grand scheme of things, and then we'd have less to catch up on later if we do move forward in this direction. And as Commissioner Kelly mentions, costs naturally increase, that there'll be less of a potential gap to catch up on in later years.
The one for extension, that math was fairly simple. I just took what they requested for salary increases. Hang on, let me pull it up here so I make sure I don't misspeak. For cost of living increases, pay equity issues, those are those first two lines. I wasn't supportive of the increased employee benefit of expenses, and then the 2,000 for supply costs and utilities. And I just lumped that all together, and that comes to 24,245 for Douglas County Extension.
Yeah, and I had just kind of lumping those first two together a little bit for 20,000, and then I also had 15,000 for the Live Well contribution, which I know there was a little bit of, felt like that was redundant to say that if they found grant funding to support that, then those funds could turn back to extension. But so I was at about 35,000 overall for the extension request. So, and tell me your number again.
24,245, I think.
Are you in agreement on the same things you're funding?
Except for the
Live Well. And
So repeat that number again for us as staff, 24.
so if we add the Live Well in, that's 15,000, is that right?
Yes.
That'd be 39,245.
Tell us which lines you were including.
I was including lines 35, 36, and 41. I hope that's right.
Which is options. 1 for the COLA,
1,
2 for the pay equity. And then you said the
last one.
The increased supply costs and utilities.
And I don't mind including Live Well, especially if we're including it in the commissioner budget, because we're going to have a conversation down the line.
So it would be that 39,245.
245.
For us one more time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
$39,245.
So it's line 1, which is a request for 4,292, or not line 1. What is that, Commissioner? My spreadsheet doesn't have the line numbers on it for some reason. And then the next one, I'm sorry, scratch that, back up. I feel like Willy Wonka there. Okay, so the first one was the cost of living increase, which is 16,862. Then the pay equity issues, which was 5,383. Then the increased supply cost, which is 2,000, and the Live Well, which is 15,000.
I also got 39,245.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. I mean, since it's a larger conversation to have, I do think there's kind of a lot to unpack with this particular partner and figuring out what a reasonable share of those increased costs should fall to the county is the answer I'm interested in uncovering somehow. So I personally did not include any of these except left some room for some consideration around the COLA increase. The other ones were not as compelling to me personally. And I mean, I really appreciate the work of Live Well. So the opportunity to understand a little bit more about that pathway and structure and what makes sense about it, and it is a good conversation to have, therefore placeholding the money. I will say the pay equity one, I was, again, we can just talk about it more, but the fact that that was one representative of one staff member was something that I didn't sit very well with me. But for the purposes of unpacking all those things together, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, Commissioner Reed, I'm not comfortable with funding it straight up, which is why I want to put it in the commissioner budget. All of those things I'm interested in should Live Well live on its own and maybe not with Douglas County Extension or Public Health.
And I like parking this in the commissioner's budget. I'm really looking for a stronger, more frequent and healthier communication with Extension. I think there's some room there, some work there to be done. So I think I'm very happy to have the 39,245.
Plus the 250,000 for Senior Resource Center.
Correct. While we're talking about, I don't know if commissioners are willing to revisit the kind of very small amounts, but I think impactful for the historic resources partners. Let's see, where is it? The 33,000 that was kind of collective together. Is there any interest there? That's, to me, I think they do quite a lot with it in terms of the economic development that they bring to us with those small dollars, and also that they're caring for and stewarding the buildings and the history that we care about, like the buildings themselves that they're looking for. Operational costs over are part of what we've entrusted them with. But if I'm the only one, we can move on from there. I know we did do the temporary collections assistant.
Yeah, I had half of that in there because we fund about half of their expenses. So I'm comfortable with half. Yeah, I mean,
People with half, it's 16,611.
but
I can get on board with that. I'm a little worried that it's not going to feel
Right.
very helpful to them after they went through that exercise of determining what the sort of best cost share was. So I personally didn't budget this one in. I'm not opposed to it. It does feel like an example of either all of it or none of it maybe makes the most sense.
At that dollar amount and looking at where our mill levy is, where I think it's going to be, I'm fine going to the full amount. I think you make a good point, Commissioner Reed. I've submitted budget requests and been halved before and then said I can't do anything with half. So I get that. I could be convinced of that.
I'm happy with the full amount, but that's also where I started. So
Yeah.
if I need to hear from others, that's fine too.
I'm good with including that. I think in the grand scheme of our budget, that it's not too significant, and I'd rather fund all of it instead of part of it, so.
So this would be ongoing mill levy of $31,222 for operations, and then we are still holding a $25,000 one-time request for temporary collections assistant.
That's correct.
Yes, sir. I think just a little edit there. I think you said 31,000. It's 33,000.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, my
yes.
eyes are bugging out.
She's trying to read far away.
Yeah. 33,222.
I know I started a conversation with the Eudora, or about the Eudora Chamber, and then we got a clarification that, because my fear was like, if the city was not supporting it, could we incentivize them to support it? And that was just a conversation, not necessarily the right tactic. The city is putting something in there. I did have the thought, so Baldwin didn't put in a request this year, but they have in the past. In the past, we've supported Baldwin and not Eudora. Is there anything that needs to be rebalanced there, or are we just done with individual chambers? Because that's part of a conversation we've been having with Lawrence Chamber and moving everything to the EDC. Those are just the pieces that kind of have been in my head that I wanted to touch again, and if not, that's okay.
So I'm personally in a space of, I can't really make sense of why Douglas County funds individual chambers. I think it's really hard to determine what the get is, other than supporting agencies that, do some important work, and it's not always clear, frequently from, I think, none of the chambers, clear what that chamber activity is doing to increase economic development and opportunity overall in our county, and that I would like us to have a more focused and clear understanding of what the county's economic development goals are. And we talked a lot about that with, entrepreneurship and through the e-community and Small Business Development Center. It's just a lot less clear for me what the get is for the chamber dollars, and that goes for all three chambers.
I think that covers it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I appreciate getting a chance to go back to it. Those are the pieces that I had. Anything else kind of stick for a conversation?
I think I just want to verify where we're at, and Cammie, maybe you could share that screen. We have made these changes on the commissioner's line item to include 39,245 for extension and 250 for SRC. And then, so we've been tracking as we've been adding and subtracting. So the mill levy up there on row 5 is accurate for where we are now. Then, so you can still subtract on row 76. And just to clarify, this is on page 31 of the commissioner's budget, which reflects that we had originally I had 4.9 million, 770,498 available for reduction, but I know you guys are taking that 250 and that 39 out of that. So does that make sense?
Yeah, currently, just with those two pieces and leaving nothing else in that line item, puts me at 4,681,253.
That's what I have.
Okay.
So do you want
I
us
know
to
we're going to get this later, but we say the number one more time.
Sure.
$4,681,253. And so we can show you what that looks like if that's helpful.
Yeah.
So Cammie, do you want to adjust from that? Yeah. $4,681,253. That's making the mill levy.
How about
Needs to be
negative?
Not add it to the melody.
No.
Not helpful.
So it moves the mill levy down to 41.298.
Cammie, oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
you can.
Can you plug that mill levy into taxes on a house on that tab?
Reduction of 2.911 mils.
And if this is where we leave it, we still have CIP to come back and talk about,
I've moved 500,000 off of it at this point.
Commissioner, you mean the full CIP budget, which
The
comes
full
back to us
CIP
in
budget
August?
is
Correct.
coming
Yeah, I
back
want
to us
to
in
be very
August.
clear
Yes,
that,
that's what we're
yeah,
setting up,
we
yes.
have a hearings, on August 7th, we're going to come back to you and talk about your 5-year capital improvement plan. Commissioners, we will get you a copy of that, I think we're tomorrow. And then we will also have the hearing on Consolidated Fire District 1 on August 7th. So, these decisions, I want to, even if we ended here and we can still come back tomorrow, even after tomorrow, I want to be very clear here. We've got a lot of math to check and a lot of validation to do. So any of these conversations are tentative and until we can validate and check the numbers. So, but it gives staff some direction to go ahead and prepare that information.
And additionally, just as a reminder to the public, we are still awaiting some information from the city of Lawrence regarding fire and medical. And that we could make decisions in the future based on that.
So we're in the ballpark of where I kind of thought we were headed through the conversation. So I'm kind of glad to see that, at least in my head, we're not far off from where I thought maybe we could end up, fully recognizing that all of this is tentative. We all have a lot of math to do, just to double check. Cami, is this something that you can send in addition to like where each of the commissioners' budgets were and the group budget? You can resend that to us. I think that is a pretty good place to stop for the day. We will come back again tomorrow, and staff will have a chance to double check their math. We can double check and see if there's anything else that we have left to talk about individually and together as commissioners. Is there anything else you want to discuss yet in the last 8 minutes of today? All right. Thank you for all of this marvelous work that we get from staff. We ask a lot of questions. You answer a lot of questions. We really appreciate how this process unfolds. So thank you for today, and we are recessed until tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you all.